Swedish Pride, and Holy Roman Slide. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is October 16th, 2020. And on this date in history, in 1962, was the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is whenever Kennedy spotted nuclear weapons in Cuba. Okay, this meant that the Soviets could strike via Cuba any place in the United States within 30 minutes. So before we could even launch any nukes to destroy all of them, they could kill all of us. So for 13 days, everyone in America knew that there was a possibility that today could be the last day on Earth. Okay, really weird. 9 months later, crap load of children were born. I don't know. Weird coincidence. Okay, so now it's time for us to talk about witches. I know that wasn't called for, but, anyway. So, witches, this was a major concern of people in Europe and even into the Americas. And it was to the point where 100,000 people were executed between 1580 and 1700. So in 120 years, just, regular executions of witches, okay? A lot of cases they were burned at the stake, and in many cases they were also hung. You got this for being in league with the devil. So this is kind of still fallout from the bubonic plague and the Reformation, and in a sense also to the Renaissance, where people were starting to question things. They were much more skeptical, and it turns out that most of the people that they executed were confessed witches. Of course, this is after they've been tortured, put onto a rack, not the country of Iraq, but they were put on this one thing, and it would actually stretch and start to shear their limbs. It was quite violent and quite sad. So yes, some people, after a little bit of torture, were willing to confess. Okay. So anyway, a lot of these were poor older women that were living alone, and whenever that happens in the American colonies, it's actually wealthier women there, but they really like to single out the women for this. Now, well, actually, so this is where it talks a little bit more about that. There were a lot of widowed women over the age of 50, and a lot of the things that happened as a result of the Protestant Reformation is going to make it possible to stop these things, because people became tolerant, and they thought that this hysteria that happened with the trials was bad for the nation. So even though it might serve as a little bit of a bit of entertainment, at the same time, you're looking at major fallout that happens as a result, and, why not just, burn or hang anyone that causes us problems as well. So now we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes of today, and that's going to fall into the 30 Years' War, okay? It's called the 30 Years' War because it lasted for about 30 years, okay? And so you have a lot of Protestants that were rebelling against the Habsburg emperors. Okay, the Habsburgs were Catholic, mainly. If you read the sign at the beginning that says Holy Roman Emperor, or Holy Roman Empire, Holy and Roman would refer to the Catholic Church. So it's kind of a spinoff from that. It's the last major religious war, although there are some fights that are done for religious purposes. I mean, you can even look at the genocide that takes place in the peninsula just north of Greece, the Serbian conflicts. All of this has to do with religious wars. But this one really is solely fought for religion. Okay. So, the Peace of Augsburg of 1555 was thought to have been the thing that caused ended all the problems in the Holy Roman Empire. But the truth was, it just ended things for just that one segment. Okay, so Calvinists still had problems, and any other sect outside of the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church was not accepted as a religion at that point. So there's a number of phases that are going on during the 30 Years' War. And the first one we're going to start with is the Bohemian Phase. So you have the Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand II. Okay? And whenever he was... Now, remember that the Holy Roman Emperors are elected by other kings in the Holy Roman Empire. So a bunch of Germanic kings are electing their own emperor. And so when Ferdinand II was elected, the first thing he did is he promised to respect everyone's religious views as long as they were either, Protestant or any other sect. But as soon as he gets into power, the first thing he does is try and force everyone in this Bohemian region, which is really hungry today, and he forces them to become Catholic. So let's talk about the defenestration of Prague. Okay. By the way, defenestrate is such a great verb. See if you can work that into a couple of sentences here in the next week. It has to do with throwing someone out of a window. So there's a verb for throwing someone out of a window, and it's to defenestrate someone. Yeah, yesterday I defenestrated 3 people, and man, it felt fantastic. So what happens is 3 Habsburg agents that were Catholic. They go to Prague, and they go to visit the leaders of Prague that are Protestant, and their response is to throw them out of the window. The fall is 70 feet and should have killed them. Okay, and they thought nothing of it. They threw them out the window, and they're like, "Ha ha! Guess what? That's all done." Well, the 3 Catholic agents landed in cow dung and survived really without a scratch. Now, they smelled like crap, literally, and probably figuratively also. I think it's possible for both whenever when you actually smell like crap. So, anyway, this is whenever the fight starts, and at the Battle of White Mountain, Ferdinand defeats the Protestant forces, and then everything is over, right? Woohoo! War's over! Yay! Yay! A lot of people die, but you have the miracle. From the Bohemian Phase, we move on into the Danish Phase. Okay, and I know that all of you are thinking, Danishes. I'm so hungry now. Oh, I love Danishes. Just remember that Danishes can also be people from Denmark. So people from Denmark are considered to be Danishes. Okay? I thought for a while I was part Danish, but it turns out I'm Dutch instead of Danish. What does that really mean? Not really anything whatsoever. I mean, everyone that ever came from that country that's had any impact on my family is super dead. Okay, so let's talk about Christian IV, the leader of Denmark, who is trying to protect the Protestants that live in Denmark, and also he's trying to get land. Okay, but he is defeated, and any time that the Danes had ever controlled the Baltic Sea is over at this point. Now remember or learn for the very first time that Greenland, that big chunk of land ice to the northeast of Canada, is part of Denmark. Okay, so once this fight's over, Ferdinand II gives confiscated lands back to the Catholic Church in what's called the Edict of Restitution. Okay, remember that whenever all these different Protestant groups and Calvinist groups and Zwinglian groups break away from the church, they all take away the land from the church, and at this point the land has been restored, and wow, that land is restored forever. I mean, it's amazing. Now we move into Gustavus Adolphus. Okay, now We're going to talk about this cat also after we get done with the treaty and we talk about some of the innovations that came during the war. So this is not the last we see of him today. Okay? So he's trying to help out the Protestants. This is shortly after the Danes are just, smacked around. Ferdinand II is no longer in power. It's now fallen to his son, Ferdinand III. Okay? And Gustavus Adolphus is there to defeat the Holy Roman Emperor, and so he defeats him, and the first thing he does is he gets them to revoke the Edict of Restitution. So all that land that was taken away from Denmark on the last slide has now been restored to them. So the 10 years that they had when they're looking longingly at the land thinking, you remember back in the good old days whenever we had access to this land? Yeah, I miss those days. Okay. Also, the French became involved in this war as well, and the Louis XIII, who we'll talk about also at the end of this slide, his main thing is to weaken the Habsburg power. So the Habsburgs, even though the Holy Roman Empire will not fare well after this war. Where am I going with that? Oh yeah. So after they get done with this war, they're still going to be around for about another 200 years. The Franco-Swedish War is really between Sweden and France, but at the Battle of Rocroi, the French defeat the Spanish, and this is the last great war that involved the Spanish. So, kudos. Okay? So remember, we'll see more of Louis XIII and Gustavus Adolphus. Okay? So, let's move on to the Peace of Westphalia. Guess what? We got to the very end of the war. Okay? And the war is over now. So this ends the war and any chance of Europe becoming one religion, one group of people again. Okay? So the Holy Roman Empire really is a shell of itself, and you have a bunch of German kingdoms that are just doing whatever they want at this time. France emerges as really the most powerful empire on the continent. England, remember, is not on the continent. German states could determine their own religion. So in the beginning, because of the Peace of Augsburg, they could decide whether they were Protestant or Catholic. And now this has moved on to, they could be whatever they wanted. But it also depended on the king of their section. Okay? That whatever German state they were in. Switzerland and Holland were created. Okay? Switzerland, which somehow has become what word do I want to use? Neutral in every war that's taken place since then. To be honest, if you are a major power in Europe, you want to go through and you want to conquer Switzerland because that's where all the banking's done. You have access to all their billions or trillions of dollars. All the money that was stolen from the Jews was hidden in Swiss accounts. There were several accounts opened with golden teeth taken from the Jews. Okay? I know that if anyone was watching, I want to say, one of the X-Men movies, it might have been Origins, they make some type of reference to this and you're like, oh, that's awful. They didn't do that. They did do that. So that movie kind of helps bring attention to that. Holland, which is also known as the Netherlands, whose people are called Dutch. Sometimes they're called Netherlanders or Hollanders, but normally the term the Dutch is what they use for that. Okay, I'm 1/8 Dutch, so do I care which one of those you call the 1/8 of me that does that? I'll get back to you on that. I might have just hurt my feelings. Nope, feelings intact. Let's keep moving. Okay, so this was a war unlike any other war at this time. You had the use of gunpowder. You had the foot soldier, and this is whenever the infantry would use these mass volleys, okay, where they line up in a straight line and they fire, then the next group goes up and fires, then the next group goes up and fires, then the next group. So you have just this, it's basically the early version of a machine gun, okay, and the mobile cavalry, people on horseback, going into battle as well. As soon as I get my mouse over, we're moving to the next slide. And there we go. Results of the 30 Years' War. So let's first start with Sweden. And we really don't talk about Sweden enough in this class. I mean, I would really love to go there myself. It's such a beautiful country. It's very cold, so if you ever go, make sure you have a sweater. So the Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus, he created the first standing army of conscripts. So this is the first time you really have a large army, and they're not just there for the war, they're always there, okay? And the ships that they used in their navies, they made massive ships that could carry between 50 and 100 cannons, okay? So other nations will follow these same types of innovations to their navy and to their army, okay? Portugal and Catalonia will rebel against Spain. Naples, Sicily, Norway, and Sweden will also rebel. So you have a lot of different groups that are trying to, get their own recognition and independence. Okay, and by the way, that's something that will splash over to the Americas. So if you're wondering where that comes from, we do come by it honestly. Peasants in the lower classes started to revolt also during this time in France and in Austria. And this is foreshadowing the major problems that you'll have in France, really from the time of the American Revolution until, about the time of World War I, where they just have a very unstable government from that point forward. The Holy Roman Empire, it breaks apart from a big mishmash of a bunch of smaller nations that were kind of united together to 300 smaller German states that sometimes kind of helped each other. Okay, one of these was a place by the name of Baden. I don't even see it here on the map, but I assure you it does exist. And that's where my family were the kings and queens of a land. Okay, so yeah, that was Baden. Also, if you go back far enough, we were in charge of Bavaria as well. But anyway, I don't know how excited you are by that. My family kind of likes it. But it probably does have to do with the fact that they're kind of us. Well, anyway. So the age of crisis, okay? There's major problems from all these religious wars. You have a big problem with climate change where there's a massive problem with famines. A lot of people are going to die during this time period, okay? And by the way, I realize that I've got a little bit different time period from what's on that book to the left-hand side, but that was written some time ago, and we've reframed it to this time period here. You have a time period of really high taxes, rebellion. This is still the time when witchcraft you have people being executed for witchcraft, and you have violent and property crimes at this time too. Okay? No longer are there centers where they're trying to take care of the poor and the homeless, so the homeless and the poor are forced to fend for themselves, and this is where you see the rise in property crimes and violent crimes towards people. Okay, you have very strong centralized Eastern and Western European monarchies, and they're all strengthened by family ties. You'll find that the majority of the major kingdoms are either brother and sister, parental, cousins, siblings, or some type of marriage has got everyone related to the point where all of the European monarchies become super inbred. Now, we're not talking as bad as the Habsburgs, but everyone is no closer than just a few generations. And by the time we get to World War I and World War II, World War I, not World War II, World War I, you have the leaders of Russia, Germany, and England. They are all first cousins and the grandchildren of Queen Victoria, okay, if you've heard of the Victorian age. So that's how closely related those three nations are. But at one point they have a wedding, and all the major leaders of Europe go to this wedding, and everyone is closely related. I don't even know if there's anyone that's as far apart as a second cousin. So first cousins are marrying first cousins, and man, just if you're a fan of inbreeding, wow, that's such a cool story. Not like I want to be inbred, but what kind of craziness is going to happen as a result of this? Well, then this is time for your story. Okay, so Bishop Jacques Bousseau, he was a French clergyman who's really a big fan of the divine right of kings. And by the way, whenever he writes this, a lot of the leadership of Europe thinks, "Wow, this is the way that everything should be, and this makes sense." Okay, because kings get all their power directly from God. God controls everything, so He puts on the thrones the people that should be the kings of these countries. Okay, and he writes all of this up in a book called Politics Drawn from the Very Words of Holy Scripture. So he spent a lot of time coming up with the title that kind of explained what he was talking about. So this is a birth of absolutism, okay? This is where all the power is held by one person, okay? No checks and balances. Everything goes to one person. The buck starts and stops with them. Any whim that they have, you follow. And if you don't like it, then you can go talk to their friend, which is you're going to be murdered. So, anyway, if you like Divine Right of Kings, well, this is the place for you. So, Henry IV, okay? So, he is the leader of France. And actually, I should probably not call him Henry IV. I should probably call him Henri IV. Okay? We talked about him in the last chapter. He was in the War of the Three Henrys, where you had Henry III, Henry of Guise, and he was Henry of Navarre. Okay? And Henry III had Henry of Guise killed, and so a monk didn't like the fact that he did that during peace talks, so he went and had Henri III killed, and so the Henri of Navarre becomes Henri IV. Okay, or Henry IV for everyone who's like, I don't even see Henri up there. Okay, so the Edict of Nantes ended all the disputes between the Catholics and the Huguenots. The Huguenots, if you remember, are French Protestants. And whenever I say end, it slowly ended it, but it's going to become a problem later on, and they're going to kick out all of the Huguenots. Okay? Henri IV also established financial order. He had the Duc de Soule, and he starts to balance the French budget and taxing. And so this is whenever they start major improvements in France. They're building roads and canals. They're draining swamps, turning them into farmland. They're colonizing places all over the world. And, the government that they create was strong enough that whenever the Duc de Soule was killed, it continued even after him. So that's kind of the sign of a good, strong government, is the fact that it can survive your death or any type of movement. So, when Henri IV dies, Louis the 13th is now, it's time for him to be king. Okay? So, since he is a small child whenever he comes to the throne, Cardinal Richaud, a cardinal within the Catholic Church, really takes over the crown of France. I mean, he rules really through a puppet in Louis the 13th. Okay, so as this cardinal of the Catholic Church is ruling everything, the first thing he does is takes away Huguenot political and economic rights. Remember, they are Protestants, and the Catholics and Protestants did not get along well. Okay, he raises the taille, which is the French direct tax, and also he raises the gabelle, which is the salt monopoly tax. So the government controlled all salt, and they had a lot of money coming in. They banned all dueling, okay, because he didn't want people taking the law into their own hands in the streets, okay. he appointed people to be intendants, or the eyes and ears of the government. Okay, so he's creating a bureaucracy of people to make sure that taxes are being collected and everything's being done right through the government. Okay, and he's really concerned with the raison d'etat, or the reason of state. Okay, so this is really a push to. Let me see, how do I want to put this? This is really a push to a push towards Machiavelli. You know, basically whatever you have to do to make it through. If you have to see people, that's fine. You put in whatever systems you need to be successful. Okay, so everything can be justified. Okay, so Louis the 13th, you know, kind of sets the stage for. Well, let's move on to Louis the 14th. Much like his grandfather, okay, Louis the 13th, and don't worry about the fact that there's not anyone between the two number-wise. He was 4 whenever he came to power, and Carlo Mazarin was his advisor. Okay, and there was this revolt where the people didn't like what Mazarin was doing. This was called the Fronde. Okay, and so because of what happened with Richelieu and Louis the 13th, people were really having a problem with the growing power of the throne, so the nobility revolted against Louis the 14th. Okay? They really wanted to make sure that the church wasn't taking too much power, and that was the fear of what was going on during this time period, so they called this time period the Fronde. And it was put down, but it kind of put Mazarin in his place, and the idea was to, you know, have your monarchy, but also have a limited monarchy where the king doesn't become too powerful. And you're going to see a lot of similarities between what Louis the 14th does and when we get to Peter the Great, what he does, you know, because they do a lot of the same things, and it's a way of making yourself powerful without everything in place to really make yourself powerful. I don't know if that makes any sense. So, he wanted to be the sole ruler of France. He's known as the Sun King. So one of the first things he does, instead of operating through the palace in Paris, he builds a palace out of an old hunting lodge that was owned by the French monarchy. It was, you know, it's what would become Versailles. And so he was going to force the nobility that want to try and take power to come to him. Okay? So he creates a royal court at Versailles, and this is where the king lived, and this is where all the major offices of France were held. Okay? So if you were in leadership in France, this is where you had to go. So he invited nobles to Versailles. He played all types of games. They had, if you did really well, then he would allow you to, help dress him for bed. And I know you're thinking that doesn't make any sense. Remember, you live 350 years later, so the types of standards and what's going on here now, or I guess not 350. Well, about 350 from the time he came into power to the time he died. Okay, so that actually goes back almost 400 years to whenever he was actually born. So, people found it a privilege to help him dress, to read stories to him at night. Okay, and so people were so busy trying to get favor of the king, they didn't have time to do anything else. Okay, now he spends almost all of his time worrying about what's happening right there in Paris. So a lot of what happens outside the city kind of is left to their own devices. Okay, and that's going to go really poorly by the time Louis's grandchildren and great-grandchildren come to the throne. Okay, Voltaire called this time period the age of Louis the 14th, okay, or the age of the Sun King. So the Versailles Palace, this is known for its Hall of Mirrors. Later on, because the Germans are upset with the French, whenever they invade France, they actually the emperor crowns himself the emperor in the House of Mirrors. Okay, 60 to 80% of all the money collected by the French government during Louis, how many years was that? From like 1642 to 1715. That is, what, 27 years short. So 73 years, 68% of the money was put into building this palatial estate, the Palace of Versailles. So, this leads us to the end of the day. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. We made it through the 30 Years' War and all the death, the building of standing armies and powerful naval ships, and the rise of the wealthy French Empire. Now, one thing I didn't mention about France is all the debt of the king, or all the debt of the nation, is considered the debt of the king. So, just something to keep in mind. Everyone have a great day, and I will see you in 2 days. Everyone be safe. Wait, is it 2 days? Everyone be safe anyway.